Hello. For those of you who don't know me, my name is David Gabor. I'm a partner at the Wagner Law Group, and my background is in employment law and human resources consultancy. Significantly, I have worked with companies, employees, and as a mediator and an arbitrator during my career, and I'm able to analyze issues from several sides. So, 'twas the night before the holiday party, and all through the land, the music was rocking thanks to the band. While the alcohol was flowing, bad behavior was showing. Harassment was ignored as victims raced for the door. So now you know why I became an attorney and an HR consultant, because I'm not really very good at poetry. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about holiday parties and any office parties at any time of the year. And the purpose of the program today is to help you take some steps so that you can avoid potential catastrophic events at your parties, ranging from the small, frustrated employees, employee engagement, to larger issues such as sexual harassment and potential liquor law liabilities if someone leaves a party who's drunk and gets into some form of an accident. So it's important to keep in mind the context. And when you think of harassment, you think of wage and hour issues, and you have a party, an employee who you invite to your office party has a right to be free from any form of discrimination during that party. And that could include sexual harassment, disparate treatment. It could be harassment by a third party. It could be a bartender, a person parking cars, a guest you invite to the party. For example, if you invite somebody who is a big client or a target client, any interaction at all could result in a potential liability. If there's an injury that occurs at the event, or the injury occurs when an employee leaves the event and the employee is heading wherever they're going, for instance, to their house, and they get involved in an accident and that employee was drunk, you can run into issues regarding liability. And another potential liability you have if you have a party in the evening, or even during the day for that matter, is that your employees may very well be entitled to be paid for the time they spend at the party. And if you've got non-exempt employees, you may have to pay those employees for attending the party. So I did want to talk about some cases that either I have handled or colleagues of mine have handled. And by the way, if you have any questions that you want to ask during the program today, please feel free to type them in and direct them to my attention, and I will do my best to answer them as we go along. Or if you want to talk at another time and ask a question, you certainly are welcome to reach out to me at any point. The reason we do these programs is to help you guys avoid problems. So the stories I have here are all real stories. And the first one, from what I understand, is there's been more than one time where this has happened, where a senior executive, in the case I handled several years ago, was the chief operating officer who thought it was a good idea to moon people at the party. And there was a case, actually it was that same holiday season, and this was in the 90s. And at this time around, the employee decided they wanted to play spin the bottle. And when the bottle landed on them, they had to go kiss. And, some of the employees were pretty upset about that. And then, you have this situation where supervisors demanding the subordinate to slow dance, and just all night was making that person dance, and she was incredibly uncomfortable. There was a female, and this was the case also that I had handled, who at the party was drinking way too much. She claimed that she didn't know it was alcohol and that somebody was spiking her drinks, but she hopped up on a table and, believe it or not, did a striptease. One company I represented years ago, a plumbing company, the owner of the company decided that he was going to have his dinner at a bar pub that was next door to a topless bar. He made the plans for it. Fortunately, I was handling another matter for him, and I helped put the brakes on before this guy actually had the party there, because I think taking his employees, many who were female, to a topless bar probably would have been not the best idea he ever had, but probably the worst idea he ever had. And then there were many times where the parties, and again, this goes back more often back in the 1990s as a time period where the idea was, let's just keep filling up people's glasses, whether it's wine or champagne. People were at the table and the wait staff would keep filling the glasses up, so people really didn't even know how much they were drinking. And sadly but true, you get people who had too much and they got drunk. Now, the problem is that liability extends beyond what happens at your event or during the event. So there are sad stories about people who left the office party and got into accidents, some with substantial injuries. There have been cases where people die on their way home, and the company hosting the party could very well be responsible for whatever awards come out of legal cases brought as a result of a person who's drunk. And there was a case that I had where a supervisor recognized that a coworker was drunk and said, "I'll get you home," and ran over to get the keys, forgot about her, whatever had happened, and she wrapped the car around a tree. Then, there was a case a colleague of mine handled where people decided after drinking a bit it was a good idea to drag race. Wasn't the best idea again either, but that did happen. And then the last illustration, as I mentioned before, depending upon how you structure your invitation, and if you have an evening party, your hourly employees, the ones who are not exempt from overtime, may very well be able to assert a claim. And that claim that they can assert is a claim for unpaid overtime wages. So you host a party, you're trying to be nice, you're trying to build spirit, your camaraderie, employee engagement, you want to say thank you for a great year, and all the employees are thinking is, hey, I have to go to this party and give up an evening. If I'm there for 3 hours, doggone it, I want time and a half for my 3 hours. So really, I think the goal is to create a concept. I like to refer to it as project management. And on the project management, before you have a party, and if you've got a party that's taking place, even if it's going to be next week, it's not too late. Much of what we're going to talk about are things you can use. But basically, start by creating a checklist of things that you want your employees you want to cover before you have that party. And then designate assignments for the people who are working on your party. Follow up with them. Make sure that they do what you ask them to do, and make it clear that you demand accountability. So what we're going to do now is we're going to jump into, when we go to the next slide, basically a list. I call it my top 10 list. No, I'm not David Letterman, although I have the same first name, but I am going to go through 10 things for you to think about that would be extremely helpful for you at the party. And first and foremost is think about the benefit of a day party versus an evening party. If you have parties during the day, people are less likely to drink as much as they're going to do in the evening. You reduce some of that potential exposure by having a daytime party. And if you have the party during the day and you've got employees who are hourly employees and they attend the party during the time they would have been working, you don't have to worry so much about whether or not you're paying for overtime. The other thing that happens when you have a party during the daytime is people are not working. So if you have a 3 or 4 hour party during the day and the people are not getting work done, then you may have a productivity issue. So that's something that weighs against a daytime party. But think it through. Again, for holiday, or if you do, like some companies do they have a party in the summer, think it through. And I think that's something that's real helpful for you. Now, the way you announce the event to your employees is also something that's very important. And this goes again to wage and hour. If you basically announce the event that you expect all your employees to attend, or this is an event that is optional, may also have an impact on whether or not you need to pay employees time and a half if they're working more than 40 hours that week. So that is something else for you to consider. Another thing that some of my clients do is if they have a party, let's say on a Thursday evening, and it's a 3-hour event, they let their employees leave 3 hours early on Friday, and they back into a 40-hour work week. So that is a potential to consider. The other thing is, and I know that there are people who are signed in for the program today who are really all over the country, and in fact, I think one person from outside the United States was signed up for it. Check where you are hosting the party, where the employees work in that area, and I would look at state law and I would look at local law, because there are sometimes laws like, for example, San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York City, Baltimore have pretty rigid laws in those jurisdictions. But one of the things I would suggest that you do is consider whether or not it matters how you invite your employees and guests to a holiday party for purposes of liquor liability, social host liability, dram shop laws, things along those lines. And that's something I think that's very important. Now let's talk about insurance. And again, it's not too late. It's critical that if you're going to have an event where there's any alcohol, that you've got insurance that's going to cover the event. So let's look at it two ways. One is, if you're hosting the event in your office and you're serving alcohol and you bring a caterer in to the event, and that caterer is going to serve as bartender, make sure that they've got insurance and take a look at the policy. Read it carefully. Make sure that policy is going to cover any potential accident that arises as a result of people consuming alcohol at your party. And then look at your agreement with the caterer regarding responsibility. Take a few minutes to look at it. And if there's any modicum of doubt that that policy is going to cover you, reach out to your liability insurance company promptly and look into special event insurance. You can get a policy of special event insurance that would potentially cover any, if, unfortunately, somebody does get into an auto accident after the event and they were drinking too much. If, in turn, your event is taking place away from your offices and you're in, whether or not it's a hotel, a catering facility, or a restaurant, or what have you, look at the insurance that they've got and your agreement with them, and make sure that it would cover in the event that there's somebody who drank too much at your party and gets into an accident. You can also, again, look into picking up a special event insurance policy. For companies that, especially that are smaller, if someone gets into an accident and they had a bit too much to drink, and it doesn't take a whole lot of alcohol for somebody to test positive, and that person's hurt, or they hurt somebody else driving down the road, you could be looking at liability in the 7 digits. And that's something for many companies that's just plain unaffordable. Now, let's go into the question of whether or not to even serve alcohol at a party. And it's interesting. There have been studies over the last few years. For example, there was a Chicago-based consulting firm that found that in 2016, 62% of companies having holiday parties were serving alcohol. In 2017, that number reduced to 49%. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen this year, but if we're following that trend, chances are, more often than not, the office party is not going to have alcohol being served. That being said, if you do serve alcohol, there are steps that can be taken to avoid having people drink too much at the event. One of them is give tickets. each person gets 2 tickets, and they can use those tickets for alcohol or non-alcoholic beverages, whatever they prefer. So we're not saying you get 2 tickets only if you're drinking alcohol. You're going to get 2 tickets, and that's what you can drink at the event. And then make it very clear to your employees that they are not to give their tickets to somebody else. That would be something that would violate your policies, and the hope would be that with 2 drinks, people are not going to be intoxicated. Another thing is you can have people pay for their own beverages. And if people pay for their own beverages, they, again, may be less likely to drink too much at your party. Keep in mind also, when you wrestle with the idea of serving alcohol at your party, that if there's peer pressure on somebody to drink alcohol at your party, you may run into issues involving the Americans with Disabilities Act. Think of this. You've got a recovering alcoholic, a person who can't drink for the obvious reasons, or you've got somebody else who's got a health issue, a medical issue, and because of their medical issue, they are unable to drink. So in those events, peer pressure, pushing people to drink, someone spiking a drink, doing something stupid like that, could create a different kind of liability for you. So we're doing a balance. On the one hand, we want to have a celebration. Celebrate the hard work, good work, the accomplishments that our business had in 2018. Balance that with, we just don't want to be in a situation where, heaven forbid, problems arise. Now, when you consider events, and this is late in the game for 2018 for holiday parties, but not for potential celebrations you have during the course of the year, whether you've got a summer party that you're looking to do, or even when you think about your holiday party for 2019. When you pick a venue, think about what is good, what's bad about that particular venue. Do they have insurance? What kind of coverage do they have? Who would be serving the alcohol at the event? Who's, going to be making sure that people are behaving appropriately? Is the layout of the room a layout where you can make sure, and we're going to talk about this in a moment, that you can identify if someone's drinking too much and catch them before they walk out the door and get into some kind of trouble? Do you want it at a hotel? Are you concerned that if you have it at a hotel, that may create other pressures, such as people pressuring somebody to spend the evening at the hotel? Are you going back to the plumber? Are you going to have the event somewhere that is just down the road from a topless bar and run into issues as far as that's concerned? So there are a host of things you may want to consider before you wind up picking an event. And this goes back to project management, a checklist of things you're going to want to ask. Now, if you're having an experiential party as opposed to more of a traditional food and alcohol kind of party, think about another concern. If you've got any employees with physical limitations and you have an experiential party, for example, laser tag, that may be a problem for your employees who are unable to participate in the event. So keep that in mind when you think about experiential types of parties. And then one of the really, really important suggestions for the program today is to prepare memoranda that you're going to issue to your employees in advance of the event. And again, this is most certainly not too late, even if you are hosting your event this evening. But make it very clear to all of your employees attending the event what is expected of them. This is not an excuse for people to get drunk, for people to be sloppy, for people to harass or haze one another. This is an opportunity to celebrate the year, and we expect best behavior. You're going to make it clear to the employees that you will have people who are designated to monitor them, monitor their behavior, so that you know or should know if anybody gets out of line. and that if someone does get out of line, that they are to tell whomever the people at the party who are designated as monitors that someone is behaving inappropriately, whether they're drinking too much, they're harassing their other people, they're demonstrating the attributes of a person who's a drunk. We want to know, and we want them to take action promptly. And if somebody observes this and doesn't report it, then they have violated a company policy at that point. Make that very, very clear. And also make it clear in this memoranda that if in the sole discretion of the management, I guess the best way to describe it, the hall monitors at the event, that a person has had too much to drink, then the management will take the keys for that employee and make other arrangements, whether it's a taxi or an Uber or a Lyft or what have you, that we will make it very clear that that person is not going to get in a car and drive themselves home under any circumstances. And that's critical to make that clear. And then we're also going to make it clear that there will be management oversight and people who are designated to walk the room. We'll have somebody who's standing by the door to see people when they leave. And these are people who are designated to have that responsibility. They will not consume alcohol, and their job is to make sure this party is safe. Now, one of the things I neglected to mention earlier that I do also want to have people think about, whether or not it's advisable to invite each person attending the party, if there's alcohol being served, whether or not they can invite their significant other and even sometimes children to attend. Why is that important? If you invite people to bring a significant other, people are less likely to drink as much and less likely to harass people in front of their family, their significant others, and if there are children, especially if there are children in the room. So on the one hand, having people bring a guest does increase the cost of the event, but on the other hand, it decreases the risk of inappropriate conduct. Something to think about. So one of the other things, and this is kind of why I put it into my incredibly pathetic poetry, is the question, should there be dancing? So many times people like to have alcohol, food, music, dancing as part of a way to celebrate. And I love to dance. I love to have a good time. But if you do have dancing at the party, there's a pretty good chance that people are going to be dancing with other people. And when people dance, sometimes they get carried away. Sometimes when they invite someone to dance with them, the person may feel it's unwelcomed and unwanted behavior. So keeping in mind that sexual harassment is unwelcome and unwanted conduct of a sexual nature. That could include dancing. So if there's a way not to have dancing, there is a way to avoid one potential way for there to be liability. And I know I sound like a real Debbie Downer, and if anybody signed in is named Debbie, I apologize profusely. But the concerns I have and the questions I raise for you to think about with your teams are ways to avoid potential problems. So one of the other things is many times I go to a party and they've got alcohol, no cost, free alcohol, drink as much as you want, and the only food they have is some cheese and crackers and maybe some past hors d'oeuvres, and they're trying to be really fancy. So instead of the pigs and blankets, hearty kinds of hors d'oeuvres, they got little light things for people to eat. And there's a ratio. I have no idea what it is because I don't practice in that area. I'm not a scientist, but there's a ratio that says the more people drink and the less food they eat, the more likely they are to become intoxicated. So if you're going to have food, make sure that you've got some hearty, heavier food there and enough of it to balance out the alcohol. Games. One of the things I had about 10 years ago was complaints made that somehow or other, one of the games that they brought to their holiday party was Twister. I don't know if all of you remember Twister or know what Twister is, but basically you get on your hands and your knees and you've got to, someone spins and you have to put a hand or a foot on a certain space. And you're playing with other people at the same time, and it could be a lot of fun for kids, but really not a good idea for adults at an office party. So think about games. And again, also, if you do have games, make sure you're not going to make people who've got health limitations or people who might be older and a bit more frail, that's going to make them feel uncomfortable. Find ways so people are going to interact with one another. Great conversation, great connections, great ways to say thank you, but in a way that's appropriate. And spend some time, should be on that project management checklist. Spend some time to make it extremely clear to your hosts, to your hall monitors, as I referred to them before, to the bartenders, to the people at the party, what you expect of them, so that they are not going to take steps. They are not going to miss taking the steps that you need them to take to ensure that you don't have potential issues that violate the discrimination laws on the state, on the federal level, on the local level, that doesn't wind up in somebody getting into the car and driving drunk, and whether they're getting the ticket or whether they're doing worse. You really need to make sure that your team is doing the right thing. And, oh, by the way, if you host the party yourself and you have someone who's underage drinking at your party, you've got not only potential civil liability, but you also may be facing criminal liability. And in this day and age, think about something else. We all have our smartphones, and we're so good at doing things like taking photographs and taking video, and within a few moments, that video can wind up on the internet. So you've got somebody who's really behaving badly at your party, regardless of who that person is. There's a pretty good chance someone's going to capture that video, and there's a pretty good chance it's on the internet before your party's over. And I can't stress this enough. This has been such a big help for clients I've worked with over the last several years, since I've been pushing hard on things like steps to take at the holiday party. Make sure that the people who are going to patrol the event, make sure that they understand exactly what you're looking for, what you want them to do, the steps you want them to take to ensure that you don't have people misbehaving. So those are the things I had wanted to discuss during this program with you today. The next slide is my contact information, but before I jump to it, there's something extremely important. I do these kinds of webinars, and I do a ton of them from a variety of different sources to help talk people through issues, make people aware of things, developments, trends, best practices. If there's anything you want to talk about or have me talk about in a future webinar, please feel free to either call me or send an email to me, and I would most certainly be happy to do a webinar, have a conference call, whatever's necessary, just to talk through these events with you. Please don't be shy about it. Reach out to me, like I said, by email, by phone. And that's all I have today. I'm wishing all of you a happy, a healthy, a joyous end to 2018 and a prosperous, both health and your business 2019. Thank you very much.